Hello, welcome to our blockchain overview. As we all know how everyone is betting big on blockchain technology that will revolutionize the way organizations are doing their business, IBM is helping advance this technology. Before jumping on to understanding what is blockchain, let's talk about few basic concepts and have a look at the problem that businesses are facing today. Now, what do you mean by business networks? In the real connected and integrated world today, economic activities take place in business networks that span national, geographic, and jurisdictional boundaries. They never operate in isolation. Business networks typically will connect a lot of participants together, and these participants can normally be customers, suppliers, banks, and partners. Now let's see how wealth is generated by the business networks and how markets play a key role in generating wealth. Wealth is generated by the flow of goods and services across the network and system of participants. This flow of wealth is often referred to as market. Growth of wealth can be constrained if the network supporting the market is heavily siloed or inefficient. There are two types of markets, public and private. An example of public market can be fruit market, car auction, etc. And private markets can be handling supply chain, financing, trading bonds, etc. Now let's see how the business networks, markets, and wealth produce assets and build value. Business networks typically come together at marketplaces where producers, consumers, suppliers, partners, market makers, and other stakeholders own, control, and exercise their rights, privileges, and entitlements on objects of value known as assets. Ownership of assets pass across the network in return for payments and are governed by contracts. Assets fall into different categories. Assets can be tangible and physical, such as cars and homes, or intangible and virtual, such as financial instruments, which is most obvious. But don't forget about intellectual assets like patents and growing digital assets like music, games, video, and art. Cash is obviously an asset. It has an interesting aspect of being anonymous, which leads to some unexpected results when you try to use it in large quantities in markets. For example, money laundering checks may be legally required for some types of large cash transactions. Right now, our focus in enabling blockchain in IBM does not center around anonymous cash or cash equivalents. Now, let's see how all the assets, transactions, and transfers are recorded and maintained. For this purpose, let's talk about ledgers. Ledgers are not new. They have been used for double entry bookkeeping since 13th century. Ledgers are the system of record for recording asset transfer in and out of business. Commercially, ledger is a principal book of account in the business house. You can also say that ledgers are the systems of record for a business economic activities and interests. Transfer of asset ownership will create value in a business network, and each transfer recorded is known as a transaction. For example, Jane gives a car to Anthony. Transactions typically involve various participants like buyers, sellers, intermediaries such as banks, auditors, or notaries, whose business agreements and contracts are recorded in the ledgers. A business typically uses multiple ledgers to keep track of asset ownership and asset transfers between the participants in its various lines of businesses. Let's see how a contract fits into a transaction. A contract is a condition for transaction to occur. Let's take a simple example. If Anthony pays money to Jane and purchases a car, then the car passes from Jane to Anthony. That is a simple transaction. To make this more complex transaction, consider how additional terms might come into play. For example, if the car won't start, or the funds do not pass to Jane as decided by a third party arbitrator. Now let's take a look at some of the issues with how ledgers are being used today. This is the picture representing the status quo for business networks. Each participant keeps their own ledger, which is updated to represent business transactions as they occur. This is expensive due to duplication of effort and intermediaries adding more margin for services. It is clearly inefficient as the business conditions like the contract etc. are duplicated by every network participant. It is vulnerable because if a central system like bank is compromised due to an incident, this affects the whole business network. Incidents include fraud, cyber attack, or a simple mistake. In summary, asset ownership and transfer between businesses using multiple partitioned ledgers is currently inefficient. It is slow to reconcile, very expensive, and vulnerable to manipulation. In today's implementation, everybody has their own ledger where discrepancies between business parties can increase time to reach settlement. A new way or solution is needed for internet age market enablement. Here is the solution to the existing trust problem in ledgers. Let's use technology to share a ledger across the business network. This network will be private to the parties concerned and permission to authorized parties who are allowed to join, and is secured using cryptographic technology to ensure that participants only see what they are allowed to see. The shared ledger will be more robust since it's replicated and distributed. All transactions against the ledger will require consensus across the network, where provenance of information is clear and transparent. All the transactions will be immutable and are final. Now, let me reiterate some key features provided by the solution: a shared, replicated, and permissioned ledger across the secure business network. The first one is consensus. That means all participants agree that a transaction is valid. The second one is provenance, means participants know where the asset came from and how its ownership has changed over time. Third one is immutability, means no participant can tamper with a transaction once it is agreed. If a transaction was in error, then a new transaction must be used to reverse the error with both visible. The fourth one is finality, means that there is one place to determine the ownership of an asset or completion of a transaction, and that is the shared ledger.